Hello and welcome back to the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. Lasker needs just one more win to finish up his short match with Nicholas Miniati, so let's waste no time getting into the action. With the white pieces, Lasker once more starts with e4, and after e5 this time goes for knight to c3. Knight to c6, and now channeling his inner Jacques Mises, Lasker plays the move g3, bishop to c5, bishop to g2, d6, and knight g to e2, all things we've seen before. Now, twice in his match with Mises did Lasker opt to open a hole on a7 with a6, but Miniati instead decides that he's fine parting ways with his bishop, playing knight to f6, and Lasker takes advantage by playing knight to a4. Now, as far as games Jacques Mises himself played are concerned, James Mason chose the move bishop to b6 against Mises at the Breslau 1889 tournament. Following knight b6, ab6, and castles, here James Mason played the move bishop to g4. After f3, the bishop moved back to e6, at which point Mises struck in the center with d4, and would go on to win this game in 50 moves. Miniati chose to play bishop to g4 right away, and after h3, this bishop also ended up on e6. Now, this particular position wouldn't be seen again until all the way in 1978, where it saw the best move f4 played, in the spirit of the King's Indian. This was played in the game between David Findlay and Gerald Bonner at the 1978 British Championship. Instead of that, Lasker chose to play the equally sensible castles. This move is a novelty, and so does as of move 8, that the players are playing a unique game. Miniati developed his queen to d7, creating a double attack on the h-pawn, which Lasker sensibly defended with king to h2, and now here comes h5. Now, I don't know if Miniati needed to win this game, or if a draw would keep the match going, but he needs to win at least one black game in order to come back in this match, so it might as well be this one. After knight captures on c5, d captures c5, and d3, Miniati pushed this pawn to h4, and of course Lasker kept things closed with g4. Now this is a really interesting position that deserves a little bit of a closer look. After long castles, which seems like a move congruent with a kingside attack, one of the engine's favorite moves here is f4 because it's an absolutely cold-blooded killer and does not mind the kingside attack. In fact, it actually invites and encourages black to play the snazzy sacrifice knight captures on g4. After h captures g4, bishop captures g4. This comes with an attack on the knight and pins it, so knight to d4 is a very annoying threat. White can get out of the pin with a move like queen to e1, but after e captures f4, knight captures f4, queen to d6. Repins the knight, g5 is a threat, h4, h3 is a pretty strong push. This other rook is coming to the g-file, and this is a very complicated game with a very crazy attack for black. Miniati went for something similar, but he switched up the move order. He started by playing bishop captures on g4. After h captures g4, knight captures g4 comes with check. The king went down to h1 and only now long castles. Now, a prime difference between this sacrifice and the computers is that this position doesn't have an immediate threat. This knight is not being pinned by anything. So Lasker can take this opportunity to play against the potentially awkwardly placed knight. Now, bishop to h3 is what Lasker wants to play, of course, pinning the knight. However, it's not really pinned, and it actually gives black a threat in knight captures on f2. Rook captures f2, queen captures on h3, and suddenly black actually has a very real attack. You could try supporting this with knight to g1, defending the h3 square, but now black gets a tempo to play the move h3 themselves. And after bishop to f3, f5 is a very tricky move. Now white is allowed to simply trade on g4 if they don't mind these protected pawns coming right towards their king, or they can take here on f5, at which point knight to f6 is forced. But here black has access to the move g6. They can open up the g-file. Again, this other rook is coming over to the g-file, and this is going to be quite a complicated position with a crazy attack for black once more. So instead of that, Lasker plays the move bishop to g5, and he gets Miniati to play pawn to f6. And now that there's something on the f6 square, knight to g1. Now the difference is that on h3, bishop to f3, because that line where the knight moves back to f6 is no longer available, black has nothing better than to take on f2. Knight captures f2 with check, rook captures f2, and now you don't take this right away, you first improve the queen with queen to d4, hitting the rook. Let's draw that arrow properly, please. It gets defended with queen to f1, and now f captures on g5, and I think that this is a worse variation for black, because white has access to the f-file, either with the queen or with just the rook is enough. For example, bishop to g4 comes. This rook can already go to the 7th rank, and I would say that black is probably not getting much out of this attack. So Miniati decided to simply take the bishop right away with f captures on g5, but now bishop to h3 properly pins this knight. And after queen to e7, bishop captures on g4 check, and king to b8. So Lasker has pretty straightforwardly fended off Miniati's initial attempts at any kingside attacks, but he now has to contend with Miniati's continuing operations in the center. So Lasker starts by playing queen to c1, getting off the d file and anticipating the c4 thrust. D captures c4 and now rook to d4. Lasker simply played f3, defending his e-pawn, and rook h to d8 came, and now knight to e2. Now the question of where you move this rook is not necessarily an easy one to answer. Rook captures on c4 comes to mind pretty quickly, but after knight to c3, the question is how do you deal with white playing the move knight to d5? Knight to d4 is one option, looking for counterplay against the c2 pawn, but white can simply defend it with rook to f2 and everything's covered. Knight to d5 is coming next, and potentially even knight to e3 to continue harassing the rook. White is going to consolidate, and they'll simply be a piece up still. But Miniati did not play the style of position to simply count pawns. He continued advancing with rook to d2, and after knight to c3 got his queen out of the way with queen to f7. This did not stop knight to d5 from coming anyway, and because the communication of these two rooks was disrupted, Miniati has to sacrifice further material. So rook 8 captures on d5, c captures on d5, and now to Miniati's credit, he comes up with a very clever position in queen to f4. Now Lasker has a super important choice he has to make here. How does he not simply get checkmated on h2? So this is the point in the game where I will ask you to pause the video, see if you can come up with a plan that Lasker concocted here to not only not get checkmated, but to also continue having the superior position. All right, 3, 2, 1. There are two options here. One of the more straightforward ones is to play rook to f2, very simply cutting off the piece's communication on the h2 square. After rook captures f2, queen captures f4, g captures f4, d captures on c6, rook captures on c2. White's going to play the move b3, and now black has a choice on how they want to recapture this pawn. If the rook recaptures, then the king gets access to the second rank and could potentially start harassing the h-pawn. So let's say b captures on c6, but now white's going to play the move a4, free this rook for active duty. This is a winning endgame for white, but if the previous two games are any indicator, Lasker would be trying to prove it for quite some time. The other option, and the one Lasker decided on, was to sacrifice the queen with queen captures on d2. Now, Lasker is already up an entire rook, so this can hardly be considered a real sacrifice. After queen captures on d2, d captures c6, and b captures on c6, Lasker has a bishop and two rooks for the queen, which materially is more than enough. Miniati does have two extra pawns, but they're both on the king side and are completely stopped by this bishop. So once again, this is a completely winning endgame for white, but Miniati, of course, has every reason to play it on for as long as he can. Lasker started by defending his pawns with c3. Of course, Miniati's not going to take the b-pawn and simply lose his queen, so he instead decided to begin activating his king with king to b7, king to g1, king to b6, rook a to d1, and Miniati moved his queen to e3 with check. Rook to f2, and now the one semblance of counterplay that Miniati has, a5. The absolute dream for him is that if he can get this pawn up to a3, he can undermine the defense of the c-pawn. Lasker played rook to d7, and now a4. If the pawn's able to advance one more square, then things could possibly happen, but Lasker denied that with a3, and now Miniati's completely out of counterplay. Now, he didn't resign for quite some time. I don't feel like putting you guys through that, so I will simply skip the next 15 moves and say that it was here on move 48 that at long last Miniati resigned not just the game, but the match. So a reasonable question to ask is why I even bothered showing these games and this match in the first place if Miniati's play was somewhat step below what we've seen before. And the answer is that I wanted to put into perspective just how impressive Lasker's previous two match results were. Jacques Mises and Henry Bird were internationally established masters, and hopefully the play shows that they were a caliber above Nicholas Miniati. And so hopefully by showing this, I've put into perspective just how impressive those match results were. Lasker wasn't just toppling over some nobodies, he was beating properly strong players who were a step above Miniati with about the same results. Hopefully that makes sense. So with that, the match against Miniati is over. Lasker has once again proved triumphant, and now he is once again on to other things. We'll get an update on his match proposal with Blackburn in the next video. There's plenty of drama to cover, so I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.